Who do you think you are? The angry family member screamed at the quiet security guard. Mark simply stood up calmly. When he removed his shirt, the scars on his chest became visible and the entire emergency room froze, because those scars could only be acquired in one place. Welcome to Human Stories, where we uncover the silent heroes walking among us. Before we continue with this powerful story of hidden service and unexpected revelation, tell us in the comments where you're watching from today, and if stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button to help us keep these voices alive. St. Mary's General Hospital, 2:30 a.m. on a Tuesday night. The kind of hour when most people are deep in sleep, but for Mark Henderson, it was just another shift in his 15-year routine as a night security guard. Mark wasn't the type of guard you'd notice. He didn't wear his authority like a badge. No swagger, no intimidating stance, just a quiet man in his early 60s, gray hair neatly combed, uniform always pressed. He'd nod politely to the staff, make his rounds with measured steps, and return to his small desk near the emergency room entrance. Most people barely saw him. To them, he was just part of the furniture, reliable, unremarkable, invisible. But Dr. Emily Chen had started to notice things about Mark that others missed. Dr. Chen was in her second year of residency, still young enough to see everything with fresh eyes. She'd worked the night shift for 8 months now, and while most of her colleagues rushed past Mark with barely a glance, she'd begun to pay attention. There was something about the way he moved, deliberate, controlled, like every step was calculated. His posture was too straight for a man his age. His eyes, when they swept the room, didn't just look, they assessed, cataloged, anticipated. And his hands. She'd noticed his hands during one of her coffee breaks. They weren't the soft hands of someone who'd spent decades behind a desk. They were marked, weathered, with small scars across the knuckles that spoke of a different kind of work. But Mark never talked about himself, never shared stories like the other guards. When conversations turned personal, he'd find something that needed his attention, politely excusing himself with that same quiet smile. It started like any other chaotic night in the ER. A multi-car accident had brought in 6 patients, and the trauma bays were at capacity. Controlled chaos, the kind emergency rooms handle with practiced efficiency. But then, the Hendersons arrived. Mrs. Henderson had suffered a massive heart attack, and her husband, Robert, was barely holding it together. As his wife was rushed into surgery, his grief and fear began transforming into something darker, anger that needed a target. The weight was killing him. 3 hours of pacing, of watching people come and go while his wife fought for her life behind closed doors. When Dr. Chen finally emerged to give him an update, exhaustion was written across her face. "We've stabilized her," she said gently, "but the next few hours are critical. We're doing everything we can." It wasn't enough for Robert Henderson. 43 years of marriage, and now he was being told to wait, to hope, to trust in words like critical and everything we can. "That's it?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the waiting area. "That's all you can tell me? Do you have any idea what that woman means to me?" Dr. Chen tried to calm him, explaining the complexity of cardiac surgery. But Robert's anguish was beyond reason now. "Don't you dare tell me to calm down." His voice grew louder, more desperate. "Where's your supervisor? Where's someone who actually knows what they're doing?" Other families in the waiting room began to shift uncomfortably. The nursing staff exchanged worried glances. This wasn't unusual. Grief and fear often manifested as anger. But Robert Henderson was a big man, and his desperation was making him unpredictable. That's when he noticed Mark. "And what about you?" Robert turned on Mark, who had quietly risen from his desk. "You just sit there all night doing nothing while people are dying? What exactly do you think you're getting paid for?" Mark said nothing. He simply stepped forward, placing himself between Robert and Dr. Chen, his movements calm and deliberate. "I'm talking to you," Robert's voice cracked with emotion. "Who do you think you are? You think that uniform makes you somebody? You think you can just stand there looking at me like that?" The waiting room had gone completely silent. Even the usual hospital sounds seemed muted. Mark looked at Robert Henderson, really looked at him, and saw something that everyone else had missed. This wasn't just a man lashing out in grief. Robert Henderson was having symptoms. The slight tremor in his left hand, the way he kept touching his chest, the sheen of sweat despite the cool hospital air, the erratic breathing pattern. Mark had seen it before, many times, in places where recognizing those signs meant the difference between life and death. "Sir," Mark said quietly, his voice carrying a tone that somehow commanded attention without raising volume. "I need you to sit down." "Don't you tell me what to do." Robert swayed slightly, his face flushing red. "You don't know any—" Pulse thready but present. Dr. Chen stared at him in shock. This was not the vocabulary of a security guard. As the medical team rushed Robert Henderson into treatment, Mark began to step back, to fade into the background as he always did. But Dr. Chen caught his arm. "Wait," she said. "How did you know? How did you see the signs when none of us did?" Mark paused, meeting her eyes for a long moment. Something in her expression, genuine curiosity rather than suspicion, made him make a decision he hadn't made in 15 years. Slowly, he began to unbutton his security uniform shirt. The emergency room staff who had gathered nearby watched in stunned silence as the quiet night guard revealed what lay beneath his unremarkable exterior. His chest and arms told a story written in scar tissue. Not random scars, purposeful ones. Surgical scars from emergency field procedures. Shrapnel marks that spoke of explosions survived. And there, tattooed small and discreet over his heart, a symbol that made Dr. Chen's breath catch, the rod of Asclepius crossed with military wings, the insignia of a combat medic. 22 years, Army combat medic, Mark said quietly, rebuttoning his shirt as if he hadn't just revealed that the hospital's invisible security guard was one of the most highly trained medical professionals they'd ever worked with. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq, field hospitals, forward operating bases, emergency extractions. Dr. Chen found her voice. Why are you working security?" Mark's smile was gentle but carried weight. "Because this is where I needed to be." He gestured toward the trauma bay, where Robert Henderson was now receiving treatment. That man just survived a heart attack because someone was watching, who knew what to look for. His wife is going to wake up from surgery to find her husband alive, not dead in a hospital waiting room from stress-induced cardiac arrest. "But you could be practicing medicine," Dr. Chen protested. "With your experience, your training." "I did practice medicine," Mark replied, "in places where the medicine was bullets and tourniquets and keeping 19-year-old soldiers alive long enough to see home again. I saved who I could, and I lost who I couldn't, and I came back to a world that wanted to talk about my trauma and give me disability ratings for wounds that healed years ago." He paused, looking around the emergency room where controlled chaos continued its nightly dance. "This isn't about trauma. This is about finding a different way to serve. You think I'm just a security guard, but I've prevented 14 medical emergencies in my time here. caught symptoms in visitors that the medical staff missed because they weren't looking at the families, just the patients, performed CPR 6 times on people who collapsed in waiting rooms, talked 3 different people out of violent episodes that could have endangered staff and patients. The uniform doesn't make me somebody, Mark continued, echoing Robert Henderson's angry words. What I've done, what I continue to do, that's what makes me somebody. And most of the time, the best way to help is to be invisible until you're needed. 3 hours later, both Hendersons were stable. Mrs. Henderson's surgery had been successful, and Robert's heart attack had been caught early enough to prevent permanent damage. They would both recover fully. Dr. Chen found Mark back at his desk, filling out incident reports with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything. The attending physician wants to know if you'd consider consulting, she said. Officially, they're talking about creating a position for someone with your background. Mark looked up from his paperwork. You mean they want me to be visible? They want to utilize your skills. My skills are being utilized, Mark replied gently, just not in the way people expect. He stood up, preparing for his end-of-shift rounds. Dr. Chen, in Afghanistan we had a saying, the best medic is the one you never think about until you need them. I've spent 15 years learning how to be that person in civilian life. As he walked away, Dr. Chen called after him. Will you at least think about it? Mark paused at the doorway. I'll think about it. But remember, heroes don't always wear the uniforms you expect them to wear. Sometimes they're invisible until the moment you need them most. Mark Henderson continues to work the night shift at St. Mary's General Hospital. Officially, he's still just a security guard. Unofficially, the entire emergency department knows they have a guardian angel in a blue uniform. Dr. Chen made sure of that. Sometimes, the most important stories aren't about recognition or titles or getting the credit you deserve. Sometimes they're about finding your purpose and serving it quietly, knowing that being invisible doesn't mean being insignificant. In a world that celebrates the loud and obvious, there's something profound about those who choose to serve in silence, watching over the rest of us, with skills we never knew they possessed. So the next time you see someone in a uniform that society considers ordinary, a guard, a custodian, a driver, remember Mark's story. Remember that some of the most extraordinary people are hiding in plain sight, carrying histories that would humble us all, waiting for the moment when their hidden talents might save a life. Because heroes don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they just sit quietly at a desk, watching over people who never know how safe they really are. Thank you for watching this story about service, sacrifice, and the heroes who choose to remain invisible. If this moved you, hit that like button and subscribe to Human Stories. Tell us in the comments, have you ever discovered that someone you thought was ordinary was actually extraordinary? What's their story? And remember, the most powerful stories are often the ones that never get told. Help us change that one story at a time. Until next time, keep watching for the heroes hiding in plain sight.